Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee, getting ready to eat my breakfast. Get my squatting and everything done for the day. And as you guys can see, I'm holding the coffee cup with a hook grip today because, as you guys saw in my footage yesterday, I'm going to work on my hook grip every day before I get back into deadlifting as part of my Bulgarian training. So you guys remember, hook grip every damn rep. In this case, hook grip every sip. All right. Today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about some misconceptions out there when it comes to things like conventional training or conventional exercises. Because a lot of people say things like, well, you don't have to do those exercises. There's no one specific exercise that's necessary for muscular development of any given body part or whatever it is you're trying to do. That is true. That is true. At the end of the day, tension is tension, workload is workload. Exercise selection in a lot of cases, particularly for hypertrophy, is largely overrated. I'll say that again. If your goal is just hypertrophy, exercise selection is probably overrated. It really is. Now, for sport-specific applications, that's not always the case. Now, the thing we get to when it comes to conventional exercises, there's multiple reasons actually why, even though they're not necessary, they're probably in your best interest to do them if you are trying to develop a well-rounded musculature, a well-rounded strength base, and you want to do so as quickly as possible and as injury-free as possible. There are reasons for that. Number one, if you're doing conventional exercises where we have strength standards in place, you can tell how imbalanced you are at any given time. What I mean is we have strength and conditioning charts all over the place. You have standards everywhere in the strength and conditioning world for most of your basic exercises. Now, a lot of you guys aren't doing things like squats or like snatches and power cleans and all that. There's standards for that, but let's take the big four, as I'd call them. Of course, you guys know I throw chin-ups in as the big five. Big four: squat, bench, deadlift, press. Press being the standing strict press, right? Where you touch your chest. We have charts for those as far as defining where you are as a novice, an intermediate, advanced, elite lifter based on body weight for all those exercises. This is from observing athletes all over the world for decades, different lifters in different endeavors, different sports, and they give you a real good idea of where you sit at any given time. Now, if your goal is to be balanced, to be well balanced, you probably want those four big lifts to be relatively close to each other on the chart. In other words, if you have two of those lifts that are a novice and one of them is intermediate and one is advanced, you're very imbalanced in terms of your musculature. And if you're saying, okay, well, I need to rebalance myself out, you guys see where I'm going with that? It will give you a good idea of where you are. In other words, if your bench press is considerably more advanced than your press, you might be lacking in certain parts of your shoulder girdle, right? It might be a weak link for you. Well, if someone's chasing aesthetics, most classic aesthetics were based upon athletes, and if your goal is injury prevention, you might want to look at that and say, okay, there's a potential imbalance here. And the same thing, looking at upper body to lower body, all these things, squat, deadlift, when you compare these different lifts with each other, it can give you a very good idea of where your actual weaknesses are. If you pick non-standard exercises that we don't have strength standards for like that, it can be more difficult to determine where you are. And I'm not saying that's the be-all, end-all. It absolutely isn't, but it is a perk in favor of these exercises because they've been extremely well studied in athletes for decades, right? By real experts, real coaches, real researchers for years and years. And so you have a good idea of where they are. Now, number two, most of these exercises that are looked at are selected because they're effective exercises that utilize large amounts of muscle mass. And when you start deviating from these majorly, what happens? Sometimes you end up with exercise variations that engage less total muscle mass. Well, if you're trying to get bigger or stronger or even more fit, more athletic, do you think you need to be doing exercises that use more muscle or exercises that use less muscle? No, you need to be leaning in the direction of exercises that use more muscle mass. In other words, front squat's a great exercise. But does it build more muscle than a back squat? No. Back squat involves more muscles, more weight through the same range of motion because it involves more muscles. There's more muscle mass involved. So therefore, it is probably going to be an overall better mass builder. Same thing. You can take like an incline bench versus a flat bench. I mean, incline bench is a great exercise. I'll be the first to say that. You know, the incline barbell bench press is a fantastic exercise. But do you think it builds as much total muscle as the flat bench? Probably not. Probably a hair less overall. I'm not saying you can't do it if you need to specialize or you got some weak points to catch up. Hey, that's great. But is it going to put as much total size and strength on you? Probably not. Now, arguably, the weighted dip is better, but then you run into issues of programming, and that's a different topic. But the point is, you might have a good reason to sub out the flat bench for something like the weighted dip, you know, if you've thought it through. But you need to have reasons for taking these conventional exercises out. But they involve a lot of muscle mass. Therefore, the other thing to remember, the more muscle mass involved in an exercise, this is something a lot of people don't know, even though they've been training a long time, the harder it is to stall. You'll say, what? In other words, the more joints that are involved and the more total muscle mass that is involved in the exercise, the longer you can usually program it before it plateaus. Because at any point, any given different muscle has a minor imbalance, and some muscles will get re-stimulated a little more than others over time, and therefore you can train it longer. You can follow a set progression pattern usually for longer before you stall with the more muscles that are involved in an exercise. It's easier to progress long term on. Therefore, it's easier to ensure more gains. It's easier to ensure more gains over a longer period of time. Those are big factors. And then another one that you've got to think about is the fact that these are exercises that have been heavily studied by coaches. They've been heavily studied by biomechanics experts, and ways to perform them efficiently and safely and use really good technique to get you there. The information's available. Information's available. In other words, there's a lot of data. You go read Starting Strength and get a real good idea of how to perfect a back squat, how to perfect your standing press in such a way that it gives you a low injury rate and involves as many muscles as possible. You don't have as much of this data out there for a lot of the non-conventional exercises. In other words, most of you out there, you can go find information real easy on how to build the most muscle mass or involve the most muscles and find an efficient bar path that's less likely to cause impingement, shoulder injuries, everything else, right, on the standing press. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of coaches who have really studied this and biomechanics experts in detail. Can you say the same thing for a seated dumbbell press? Can you get as much information? And for a lot of you out there who don't know as much about biomechanics, do you even know where your injury risks are on, say, a seated dumbbell press? Do you know what's most likely to get you hurt? Do you know what hand positions, dumbbell positions, ranges of motion are most likely to injure you? No. Can you even recruit as much muscle mass on that as you can on the standing press? No. So I'm not saying it's a terrible exercise, because, you know, most exercises are not terrible. But what I'm saying is you are probably going to be able to build a base better using these exercises more safely, because they have been far more heavily studied, and experts have figured out how to take these exercises and engage the most muscle possible. In the bar pass, it gives you sometimes better leverages that are safer, that put the least strain on things like rotator cuffs, things like that. There's a lot of information available on this stuff. There's less available to you on a lot of these other exercises. So what I'm saying is, because of the ability to load them longer, the way to compare your strength on these exercises with each other to see where your balance is and find out maybe where some of your imbalances are overall as far as your overall musculature, there's a lot of information available that makes these good. The fact that they have all been studied, they're all usually big exercises that involve maximum amounts of muscle mass for that movement pattern. Again, exceptions being like maybe the deadlift versus a deficit deadlift. But, you know, the same biomechanics apply to it. But these exercises have a lot of information available for you to do that with, and they all involve large amounts of muscle mass. There's technique available that's been studied heavily to figure out how to do them safely while involving the most muscle mass, and they're going to be overall easier for your long-term general buildup. You're more likely to be successful as a result of this. I'm not saying that's true across the board, and I'm not saying there isn't ever needs for accessory work, because that's when you start looking at these other exercises. When you start to develop imbalances that you can't correct purely due to a little more focus on one exercise versus another, then that's when you involve these other exercises. But they're best left as secondary exercises. You're simply going to have better potential for long-term results with these conventional lifts. There's no need to reinvent the wheel here. And I feel like sometimes people do it just so that they can say they're doing something different. In some cases, it's to hide their strength. But the thing I would ask you, if you're hiding your strength, are you hiding it from everyone else? Or are you hiding it from yourself on some of these lifts? And the reality is you might be shortchanging yourself a tool that could let you know that maybe you have some imbalances that you need to work on. Because these charts and things comparing these different lifts can really tell you a lot about that as far as what's going on, as far as the strength standards go. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you'll really know where you stack up against other people. And people say, well, that doesn't matter. Well, that does matter sometimes when you're chasing development, when you're chasing athleticism. It's not a bad idea to know where you stack up at any given time, so it maybe lets you know what you might need to work on more. And that's never a bad thing. It's all that does is give you information. All that gives you is information that you may be able to utilize to reach your goals more effectively. At the end of the day, we just have more data available on these exercises, and they're all good exercises. They're all great exercises for the most part. Some of the non-conventional ones, not so much time proven, and therein lies another difference. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.